Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour or so then, we'll see what's making the headlines with Catherine Ostler, former editor of Tatler, author too of a new book, The Duchess Countess, and with the former BBC Royal Correspondent, Jennie Bond. Great to see both of you. To the front pages then, first of all, before we get your thoughts, dominated of course by the news of the death of Prince Philip. My strength and stay, that is the headline on the front page of The Times, repeating the Queen's tribute to the Prince on their golden wedding anniversary back in 1997. This is the front of the Daily Mail then, the headline, Farewell, my beloved. A similar headline for the Mirror, Goodbye, my beloved. The Sun has a special wraparound two-page cover with the words, We're all weeping with you, ma'am. The Daily Telegraph fills its front page with a picture of the Prince and leaves the words for its inside pages. Similar too for The Guardian. The Daily Express reflects on the Prince's life of devotion to Queen and country with the headline, Deep Sorrow. The Eye too calls, reflecting on what it calls a life of duty. While the Star describes him simply as her rock. The Press and Journal also uses the word rock, reflecting on the fact that the Prince, as Duke of Edinburgh, was particularly loved in Scotland. And though the Financial Times doesn't lead with the Prince's death, it does carry a front page picture of him. Well, I'm joined then by Catherine Ostler and Jennie Bond. Where to start? Catherine, an extraordinary life, a long life, many newspapers, of course, reflecting on the devotion of the Queen and Prince Philip as a couple tonight and Her Majesty's loss.
Yes. Well, I was very struck by that Mail cover. I think it's very clever. You see two things in it. You've got him in his, his star, or his Order of the Garter, all his medals, and her in her tiara and her wonderful jewellery, looking so regal, and yet the way she looks at him is just so sort of loving and personal. I really think you get both sides of their life in that one picture.
Jennie, what about you? I mean, we saw very similar with the Daily Mirror as well, didn't we? This extraordinary bond these two people had, how they complemented each other despite being very different, the different roles they had, and certainly the newspapers showing the couple do reflect on that.
Yes, I think that's a lovely picture, yes, and the Mirror also has a lovely picture with a similar headline, Goodbye, my beloved. They were a fabulous couple together. He was such a counterpoint to her. She is quite a shy woman by nature, and yet he was so self-reliant, so full of confidence. And I saw them at many events, obviously, over very, very many years. And when a royal tour, I tell you, can be quite fatiguing and quite tiring, even if you're just a reporter covering it, so much more so for the principals. And perhaps when she might be finding it very exhausting, even a little tedious, dare I say, he would lighten the mood. He would get someone in the crowd chatting, or he'd pick up a little girl and bring her to the Queen so she could give a posy. He was opposite to her in very many ways, but my goodness, what a partnership they had, and the papers reflect that today.
Absolutely. We're watching other pictures too of that. I mean, The Sun does what the newspaper industry calls a wraparound, the complete cover, all the pages inside as well. With that sentiment, we're all weeping with you, ma'am. He's just been there all our lives, hasn't he, Catherine? He is an institution himself as part of the monarchy, but also as the fixture in our lives and our sensibilities.
Isn't he? I mean, born, when Lloyd George was Prime Minister, it's an amazing, he is sort of, to us, he sort of is British history. But The Sun, I particularly like the wrap. I particularly love seeing the wedding picture there, where it's so sort of romantic and sort of lovely, isn't it? And it's very easy to forget they had a whole life before she became Queen, and there they are. She's a princess, he's in the Navy. When my uncle was in was the High Commissioner in Malta, and they went on a visit there, and he told my aunt they'd never been as happy as they were in Malta, which is before she became Queen. Between, there's that, I think it's a 5-year gap between wedding and coronation. And there you have it, very cleverly in there.
And Jennie, I mean, that was such a significant phase of their lives, wasn't it? The early death of the Queen's father while they were on a Commonwealth trip to Kenya. And the significance, of course, for Prince Philip was that he gave up his naval career, something that was so important to him and something which he had done so well at, predominantly during the Second World War, notably did well. And many people say he could have gone on to be First Sea Lord. It must have been a great sacrifice for him at that point.
It was, yes, indeed. He was mentioned in dispatches for his war record, very, very valiant war record. But he was asked whether he regretted that. I'm sure it was one of the greatest regrets of his life that he had to give up his naval career. But in typical form, he said, well, regret, what is the point? What's the point of regretting anything? I mean, it happened, so you just get on with it, don't you? And I think today the newspaper reflects that sentiment very well on its front page, because it says a life of duty. And that is what he buckled down to do. And did it with aplomb, it has to be said. He said that my first and only duty now on is to support and serve the Queen. And that's exactly what he did. And also in the there's a piece by Harry Mount, which is mentioned on that front page, in which it says his blunt manner was his greatest PR tool. And in many ways, I think it was, because he said what he thought. Sometimes it turned out to be a bit tactless, and hence we got all the stories about his gaffes. But he was direct in a manner that I think people really appreciated. And people look forward to reading about him, to seeing him and to meeting him, because, he kind of shoot from the hip. And I think people like that.
Yes, Harry
and
Wright.
This picture, Catherine, interesting, because this was his final formal bit of service, if you like, saying goodbye to the Royal Marines, having been their captain for 64 years. This was the summer of 2017 when he formally retired. Not many people retire at the age of 96, do they? I mean, that is a life of service and devotion and duty, which is something that both the Queen and Prince Philip shared as a common commitment.
Yes, isn't he incredible there? I mean, I look at these pictures and I keep thinking about his childhood and how terrible it was. The father who ran off, the mother who was sent to hospital when he was only very young for 5 years. He didn't speak to her for 5 years. And then his favourite sister died in a plane crash. And he sort of dropped into sort of Gordonston, quite alone. And I think it's very fashionable now to talk about building resilience in our children. But that's what circumstance forced on him. Something that he sought to share with the children of Britain in the Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme, which was his way of trying to give other children what he'd had, which is the relief that comes from action and physical activity. I think that was his way of overcoming difficulties, and he knew this would work for other people. So marvellous to see him keeping going then when he was so old. But I think he also knew that was what was good for him.
Yes, and his own children.
This fractured childhood was replaced really by the structure that you get from the military, but the structure too, Jennie, from the royal family. If we take a look at the Times too, "My strength and stay," the words of the Queen. Just a thought on her tonight in the building behind me here at Windsor Castle. Without the man she'd been married to for 73 years, been with him for longer than that, obviously. Your thoughts for her and about her tonight?
Well, yes, of course. I think the whole nation feels for the Queen tonight. Such a very long, stable and happy marriage. Her partner, her companion, the only man that she could confide in, the only person the Queen really could tell it as it was to. And he was the only person who would tell the Queen off if he felt like it and say, well, That's a stupid remark. In private, he would say that. She was very clever in that she allowed him to run the royal estates, to be the head of the family. In public, obviously, he had to defer to her, though he viewed it as a very equal and balanced partnership. I think the only comfort one can think of for the Queen tonight is that she has been able to share most of this last year with him. Because of the pandemic, they've been holed up together at Windsor Castle, and except when he was in hospital, they were very much together, which is a little different to the prior years. After his retirement, he went to Sandringham and spent a great deal of time at Wood Farm, which is the smaller house there, while the Queen carried on her work in London and lived at Buckingham Palace and Windsor. So they were apart quite a lot. But she has the comfort of knowing she has spent most of his last year with him and together.
Yes, I mean, a strange benefit of the pandemic that these two, you know, or the Queen, very busy still at least, Prince Philip in the past, had been so busy they had shared less time with each other. The Times, just a final thought, Catherine, is one of the papers we can read where they start to reflect about the funeral arrangements to be held here and the question of who might be there with the COVID restrictions and whether Prince Harry will fly in. Your presumption is that he will?
I would have thought he would. I mean, he has to, doesn't he?
Well, certainly the Times speculates that he will come, and possibly Meghan will not, because she is obviously quite heavily pregnant. So, but we await more details, certainly, from the palace about those funeral arrangements. Plenty more about Prince Philip too. Sorry, Catherine, carry on.
I was just going to say it would be extraordinary if he didn't.
OK, well, no doubt we will find out more details, but plenty more still to come as well, reflecting about the Prince's life of service to Queen and country with the Mirror. Well, welcome back. You're watching the press preview. With me now, Catherine Ostler, former editor of Tatler, author of a new book, The Duchess Countess, and the former BBC Royal Correspondent, Jennie Bond. Welcome back to both of you. Jennie, let's delve straight inside the papers, shall we? Inside the Daily Mirror, which, as many of the newspapers do, have multiple papers, or pages rather, in the newspapers for tomorrow. But a really poignant one once again, alone after 73 years of love. And certainly Giles Brandreth, I heard on the radio today, saying that she'd watched them after an engagement where they'd been separated. They got in the car to drive home together, and he was clearly regaling a story to the Queen, who was chuckling for a good 15 minutes. They must have had a most amazing partnership together, a romantic relationship, and this great partnership in work too.
Yes, he certainly could make the Queen giggle and laugh a lot, and that sometimes she really needed that. Yes, the Mirror, I think, has a quotation there from the former private secretary, the late Lord Charteris. He served the Queen for many years, and others before. And he was part of the old guard who probably viewed this incomer with some suspicion, this modernizer, this as the Queen's cousin once put it to me, this foreign interloper who just probably wanted to run away with the goodies. He probably viewed Philip in that way, but he came to appreciate all that Prince Philip meant to the Queen. And the quotation in the Mirror is that he treats the Queen simply as another human being, and she really values that. And I think tonight, more than ever, she will be thinking how much she valued the man, the prince she fell in love with so many years ago. In almost 74 years they were married.
Well, indeed. And Catherine, if we take a look too at The Guardian, you see just how handsome he was, and who would not fall in love with that young man, and still in his later years. We see him as a traditionalist, don't we, because we hear about his duty and his service. But in many respects, he was ahead of the game, wasn't he? His fascination with so many different things, a breadth of knowledge and interests.
Yes, everyone always comments on how well read he was, how curious he was about technology and and computers, and how he introduced sort of walkabouts and wanted to bring the cameras into the coronation. There's this idea of him as a sort of old-fashioned, sort of benevolent uncle type, but far from it in his youth and later.